The workshop is yours now, son.
Yusuf lifted the old leather apron, scarred, burned, 40 years at the forge, and tied it around Tariq's chest. The room clapped. Tariq raised his hands like a champion. Samira stepped forward. Surely now. Her father did not even look at her.
Samira,
He said,
the cups are empty.
every gate that made them famous, she had forged herself. They were about to find out the hard way. What do you do when you give your whole life to something, and then watch them hand it to someone who never lifted a finger? What happens when the person celebrated for your work is your own little brother, and the one sent to pour the tea is you? And how do you keep your head up when your own father looks straight through you, as if 40 years of your hands meant nothing at all? This is the story of Samira, a woman who could shape iron the way other people shape bread. She built every gate, every railing, every balcony that made her family's name respected across the whole district. And it is the story of the day they finally gave it all away. And the day, not long after, when one single weld decided whose hands the family name truly belonged to. If stories of quiet strength, betrayal, and justice move you, take 1 second to subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it tells me to keep telling these stories. Now, let's begin. Samira learned the smell of hot iron before she learned to write her name. Their house sat at the back of the workshop, in a narrow street where every family knew metal. Her father, Yusuf, was the best in the district. People came from across the city for a Yusuf gate, heavy, beautiful, covered in leaves and vines that looked like they were still growing. As a little girl, Samira would sit on an upturned bucket and watch the orange light dance on her father's face. She watched the way he listened to the metal. She watched the way he waited. She was 6 the first time he let her hold the tongs. She was 9 the first time a weld of hers held clean. By the time she was 15, she could read the heat by its color alone, straw, then orange, then white, and know the exact moment to strike. You have the hands, her father told her once, quietly, when no one else was there. God gave you the hands. But God, in their street, had also given the rules, and the rule was simple. A workshop passed from father to son, not to a daughter. A daughter married and went to another house and worked another family's kitchen. Everyone knew this. No one argued with it, not even Yusuf. So while Samira grew at the forge, her younger brother grew into a story. Tariq was the son. From the day he was born, he was the heir. Aunts pinched his cheeks and called him the future master. Their mother, Amina, set the best meat on his plate. Their father walked him through the showroom and said, "One day, all of this is yours." There was only one problem, and the whole family worked very hard not to see it. Tariq could not weld. It was not that he was lazy, though he was. It was that the fire frightened him, and the metal would not obey him, and he had no patience to learn why. His joints cracked, his welds bubbled and ran. He burned his fingers and blamed the iron. After an hour, he would put down the torch and go sit in the shade with his phone, and someone would say, "He is tired, he works so hard." And Samira would pick up his ruined piece and quietly make it right. She did not mind, not at first. She loved the work too much to mind. While Tariq was being called the future, Samira was at the anvil until midnight, and the gates that left their workshop, the famous ones, the ones people talked about, were leaving from her hands. When Samira was 17, a rich man on the hill ordered the grandest gates the workshop had ever made. 2 great doors of iron, taller than a man, with a peacock spreading its tail across both halves. Yusuf's eyes were already tired by then. It was Samira who stood at the forge for 3 months. It was Samira's peacock. When the gates went up, the whole district came to look, and the rich man shook Yusuf's hand and said, "You and your son do beautiful work." Tariq, 16, stood beside their father and smiled and said thank you. Samira watched from the truck. She said nothing. She told herself the gates were enough. And she had a secret. On every gate she made, deep in the scrollwork where no buyer would ever look, Samira pressed one tiny mark of her own. Not her father's stamp. Hers. A small 5-petaled flower, no bigger than a fingernail, hidden among the iron leaves. It was the only thing she let herself have. The world would call these gates her father's, then one day her brother's. But she would know. In the cold metal, in a place only she knew to look, she had signed her name. She told herself it was enough. It would be years before she learned just how much that little flower would come to mean, and that one day, the whole street would go looking for it. The years went by the way years do in a working house, fast, and without anyone deciding anything. Yusuf's hands began to shake. His eyes clouded. He came to the forge later each morning and left earlier each afternoon. Until one winter, he mostly stopped coming at all and sat by the door wrapped in a blanket, giving orders he could no longer carry out himself. Samira carried them out. Every single one. While Samira was running the whole workshop, ordering the iron, drawing the designs, standing at the anvil from dawn until her back screamed, Tariq was learning the one skill he truly had. He could talk. He was good at it, too. He bought nice shirts. He learned to stand in the showroom with his arms folded and call buyers, "my friend." He learned to run his hand along a railing Samira had made, and say, "Yes, this one gave me trouble, but I would not let it leave until it was perfect." And the buyers believed him because he looked the part, and because the work was perfect, and because no one imagines the master is the tired woman sweeping the back floor. One day a woman came to collect a balcony rail for her new house. It was a beautiful thing, light as lace, and Samira had bent every curl of it by hand. The woman touched it, and her eyes filled. "Who made this?" she asked. She looked at Tariq. "Your hands?" And Tariq smiled and said, "My hands." Samira was 3 feet away, sweeping. She did not look up. She told herself the rail was enough. But it was not only credit that Tariq took. It was risk he could not carry. He began saying yes to jobs and taking the money before he understood them. Once he promised a man a security gate in 4 days and tried to weld the frame himself to prove he could. The corners came out twisted. The lock would not sit. The man was coming in the morning. So Samira stayed up the whole night, cut Tariq's joints back out, and built the gate again from the start. In the morning, Tariq met the man at the door, fresh and smiling, took the envelope of cash, and never told their father whose hands had saved him. He did not even thank her. He told her to clean the floor before the next customer came. That was the thing about Tariq. He did not feel he was stealing. He felt he was owed. "You are a woman," he told her once when she dared to ask why her name was never spoken. "You should be married, in your own home, with children. Father lets you play here because he is kind. Do not forget whose name is on that sign." And the worst part, the part that sat in Samira's chest like a stone, was that their father, listening from his chair, said nothing. Nothing at all. So when the day came that everyone had always known would come, no one was surprised but the metal. Yusuf gathered the family and a room full of relatives. He took off his old leather apron, the one he had worn for 40 years, scarred and burned and soft as cloth, and he tied it around Tariq's chest, and he said the words, "The workshop is yours now, son." The room clapped. Tariq raised his hands. And when Samira stepped forward, because surely, 40 years of her hands had earned her one word, her father did not look at her. "Samira," he said, "the cups are empty." She poured the tea. Her hands did not shake, but something in her that night went very quiet and very still. That should have been the end of it. It was only the beginning. A month later, a black car stopped in their narrow street, and a man in a fine gray suit stepped out. His name was Mr. Saleh, and he was restoring the Pearl Hotel, the great old building on the main square, shut for 30 years, that every person in the district had grown up walking past. He wanted its centerpiece returned to its former glory, a pair of grand entrance gates and a sweep of balcony railings, iron lace as tall as 3 floors. It was the most important commission anyone in their street had ever been offered. Whoever made it would be famous for the rest of their life. Mr. Saleh shook Tariq's hand. "They tell me you are the master now," he said, and Tariq, in his nice shirt, smiled and said, "I am." That night, Tariq could not sleep. By morning, his face was gray, because Tariq knew the one thing he had spent his life hiding. He could not make those gates. He could not make a clean hinge. And so, for the first time in his life, he came to the back of the workshop where Samira was working, and he sat down, and he was almost gentle. "Sister," he said, "I need you." He promised her the world. He said this time it would be different. He said her name would be spoken. He said they would be partners, truly, that he would tell Mr. Saleh the truth when the work was done. Samira looked at her brother for a long time, and then she said yes. Not for him, for the gates, because in her mind she could already see them, the most beautiful things she would ever build, and she could not bear to let them be born ugly from frightened hands. So she rolled up her sleeves, and she began. For 3 months, Samira lived at the forge. She barely slept. She drew the great peacock and vine pattern that would crown the gates. She cut and bent and welded every joint. And slowly, in the firelight, the most magnificent gates the district had ever seen began to rise. Even Tariq, watching, went quiet. Even Tariq could see they were a miracle. And that was the problem. Because as the gates grew more beautiful, something turned in Tariq. He stopped saying we. He started standing in the doorway when visitors passed, taking praise for gates that were not even finished. And a poison thought grew in him. If these gates make someone famous forever, why should it be her? 2 weeks before the unveiling, Tariq made his move. He told Samira the central crest, the great iron medallion at the very heart of the gates, the piece every eye would land on first, was not good enough. He would make it himself, his way, to put the master's hand on it. Samira begged him not to. That piece was not just decoration. Its hidden joint was the spine of the whole gate. It carried the weight of both doors. It was the hardest weld in the entire commission. Tariq did not care. He needed one piece, one famous piece, that was truly his. He cut out Samira's centerpiece. He spent 4 days building his own, and when she came to fix what she could already see was wrong, the joint thin, the weld bubbled and cold, Tariq lost his temper. He went to their father, and together they barred her from the workshop. "Go home," Tariq told her at the door. "A master does not need his sister holding his hand. When they cheer on Saturday, they will cheer for me." The lock turned. Samira stood in the narrow street, on the outside of the only place she had ever belonged, and listened to her own gates being finished by hands that could not weld a hinge. Saturday came. The whole district crowded into the main square in front of the Pearl Hotel. There were lights and a ribbon and a great white sheet thrown over the towering gates. Mr. Saleh stood with his guests in their fine clothes. The newspaper man raised his camera, and Tariq, in a brand-new suit, the old leather apron tied proudly over it for show, stepped up to the rope to reveal the masterpiece he had not made, holding the whole family's name in a joint he did not understand. Samira stood at the very back of the crowd where no one would look. She did not yet know that in the next 5 minutes, everything was about to change. If you are still with me, take 1 second to hit subscribe, because what happened when they pulled down that sheet is the reason I had to tell you this story. Mr. Saleh nodded to the men at the ropes, and they pulled the sheet down. For a moment, the whole square forgot to breathe. The gates rose up into the evening light, 3 floors of black iron lace, and across them a peacock spread its tail so finely worked that the feathers seemed to move when the lamps flickered. Vines climbed and curled and bloomed. It was not a gate, it was a garden, frozen in iron. People put their hands to their mouths. Someone began to clap, and then everyone was clapping, and the sound rolled across the square like rain. Tariq stood beneath the masterpiece with his arms wide, the old apron on his chest, and he drank it all in. The newspaper man's camera flashed and flashed. "Master Tariq," he called. "This way, Master Tariq." Samira, at the back, looked at the gates she had built and felt her eyes sting. Not with pride, with grief. They were beautiful and they were hers, and the whole world was cheering the wrong name. Then Mr. Saleh raised his hand for quiet. "Magnificent," he said, "truly. But a gate is made to open," he smiled. "Let us see them swing. Let us walk through the Pearl Hotel's new gates together." The crowd loved this. They pressed closer. Tariq's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes did, because Tariq had built the spine. Tariq had built the hidden joint at the heart of the crest, the one piece that turned a wall of pretty iron into a working gate. And Tariq did not know, the way only a real welder knows, what a joint like that has to carry. 2 workers took the great handles. Mr. Saleh gave a small, happy nod. And they pulled. The gates began to swing. Slow. Heavy. Beautiful. And then came a sound no one in that square will ever forget. A deep, sick groan from the center of the iron. Metal grinding against metal where it was never meant to touch. The great crest at the heart of the gates shuddered. A black line opened across Tariq's joint, thin as a hair, then wide as a finger. The peacock buckled, and with a screech that cut straight through the cheering, the right-hand gate sagged off its spine and swung down crooked, scraping the stone, the most beautiful thing the district had ever made, now hanging twisted and broken in front of the entire square. The clapping stopped, as if a switch had been thrown. Silence. The camera flash froze it all. Mr. Saleh's open mouth, the guests stepping back, and Tariq standing under the ruin of his own lie in his brand-new suit, the borrowed apron suddenly looking like a costume on a child. Tariq's voice cracked. "It is the iron. The iron was bad. The supplier—" But Mr. Saleh was not listening anymore. He walked up to the broken joint, this man who had restored 100 old buildings, and he looked at the weld. Thin, cold, bubbled, the work of someone who had never learned. He turned slowly to face the new master of the famous workshop, and his voice was very quiet, and it carried all the way to the back of the square. "You did not make these gates," he said. "A man who could weld this crest could never have welded that joint. So tell me the truth, in front of all these people. Who built the Pearl Hotel gates? And Tariq had no words left. None at all. From the very back of the crowd, a voice answered. It was not loud. It did not need to be. I did. Every head in the square turned, and the people stepped aside, the way a crowd does without being told, to let through a tired woman in soot-stained clothes, a welding mask pushed up on her head, walking toward the broken gates as if she had built them. Because she had. Tariq's face went white. Samira, he started. Be quiet, said Mr. Saleh, not even looking at him. He was looking at her. You, say it again. Samira stopped in front of the gates. She reached up and laid her hand flat against the iron, gentle, the way you touch something you grew. I built these gates, she said. Every leaf, every feather. 3 months at the forge with my own 2 hands. She turned to the joint that had failed, her brother's joint hanging broken. All of it but this one piece. This piece my brother took out of my hands 2 weeks ago because he wanted something at the center that was truly his. She looked at it for a long moment. And it is. This broken thing is the only honest part of this whole gate. This is exactly what he can do. A murmur ran through the square, but it was an old man near the front who turned the murmur into proof. He was a locksmith, the oldest tradesman in the district, and he had been squinting at the iron since the sheet came down. Now he pushed forward, his fingers shaking, pointing not at the broken joint, but at the foot of the gate, low in the scrollwork where the vines met the ground. The flower, he said. Look, the little flower. People bent to see. And there, hidden among the iron leaves where no buyer would ever look, was a tiny 5-petaled flower, no bigger than a fingernail, pressed into the metal. I have bought iron in this street for 50 years, the old man said, his voice rising. And every famous gate this family ever made, the peacock on the hill, the rails on the square, the doors of the old courthouse, every single one has this flower hidden in it. I always thought it was the old master's mark. He turned and stared at Samira. It was never his. It was yours. All this time. It was you. And then it broke over the square like a wave. Because suddenly everyone understood. Every gate they had ever admired, every railing they had walked past for 20 years and called a Yusuf. The beautiful things that had made this whole street proud, all of them, all along, had come from the hands of the woman they had sent to pour the tea. The proof was not on paper. The proof was in the iron, in 100 hidden flowers across the whole district, signed where only the maker would ever dare to look. People turned to look at Tariq. And Tariq, who had spent his whole life being called the master, finally looked exactly like what he was. But Samira was not finished. Because a broken gate was still a broken gate, and Mr. Saleh's guests were still standing there, and the Pearl Hotel still had no working entrance. She turned to the workers. Bring me my torch, she said, and clear back. Right there, in the square, in front of the whole district and the camera and the man in the gray suit, Samira knelt at the ruined heart of the gates. She cut away her brother's cold, thin weld. She set the great crest back true, and then she struck her arc, and the white light bloomed against her mask, and the whole square went quiet to watch the master work. She read the heat by its color. Straw. Orange, white, and at the exact right moment, she struck. When she stood and stepped back, the joint at the heart of the gates was one clean, seamless line, strong enough to carry both doors for 100 years. She nodded to the workers. They took the handles. They pulled, and the gates of the Pearl Hotel swung open. Slow, heavy. perfect, without a sound. This time, when the square erupted, every person in it was cheering the right name. Mr. Saleh did not give the commission back to Tariq. He gave it to Samira, the broken gate repaired and paid in full, and a contract for the railings and 3 more buildings besides, signed that same week with her name at the top, spelled out for the first time in her life. "I do not care whose son runs the sign," he told her. "I care whose hands hold the iron. From now on, I deal only with you." The newspaper ran the story on the front page, not the story Tariq had planned. The headline was about the woman who had built a district's worth of beauty in silence, signed it in secret, and stepped out of the shadow on the night a gate came down. By the end of the week, half the city knew the name Samira, and orders came in faster than she could take them. But the part that mattered did not happen in the square. It happened 3 days later, in the quiet of the workshop, between a father and a daughter. Yusuf came to the forge while she was working. He stood a long time without speaking, an old man leaning on the doorframe, watching his daughter do the thing he had taught her, the thing he had pretended for years that someone else could do. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken. "I knew," he said. "Samira. I always knew. The hands were always yours." He looked at the floor. "I told myself the rule was bigger than the truth. I was a coward, and I let them send you to pour the tea in the house your hands built." Samira set down her torch. She had waited her whole life to hear those words, and now that they came, she found she was not angry. She was just tired and free. She walked to where the old leather apron hung on its hook. Tariq had left it there after the square and not dared touch it since. She lifted it down, this scarred, burned, softened thing, 40 years of a family's work soaked into the leather. And she did not put it on. Instead, she carried it to her father and folded it into his hands. "Keep your apron," she said gently. "It was a good man's apron, on his good days. But I do not need to wear yours." She crossed to the front of the workshop where the old sign hung and looked up at it. "I am going to make my own." And she did. The new sign that went up over the door did not say "and sons." Beside her name, it carried one small symbol, a 5-petaled flower, no bigger than a fingernail, brought up at last out of the hidden corners and set in the open for the whole street to see. As for Tariq, this is where Samira surprised everyone, including herself. She did not throw him out. She could have. The whole district would have understood. Instead, a week later, when he came to her without his nice shirt and without his speeches, and stood in front of her with nowhere left to hide, she handed him a broom and a length of cheap pipe. "You can stay," she told him, "but the lie is over. You will not stand in my showroom and call my work yours. You will not take an envelope you did not earn. If you want the word master, you will learn to weld a clean hinge like everyone else, starting at the bottom, starting today. And if you ever again take credit for another person's hands," she let the words sit, "you will not come back to this door." Tariq looked at the broom for a long, long moment. He was not a brave man, but he was, for the first time, an honest one. He took it. He was not a quick student, but he was at last a real one. And slowly, joint by ruined joint, under the patience of the sister he had spent his life pushing aside, Tariq began the long work of becoming, in truth, the thing he had only ever pretended to be. I think about Samira's story a lot, and here is what it leaves me with. You can give a name away. You can hand over a sign, an apron, a key. You can stand in front of a crowd and call someone the master, and if they smile and wear a nice enough shirt, the world will believe you for a while. But some things cannot be inherited, and cannot be stolen, and cannot be faked. Skill is one of them. Truth is another. They do not live in the title over the door. They live in the work. They live in the hands. You can push the reel maker to the back of the room. You can send her to pour the tea. But sooner or later, life asks everyone to open the gate, to actually do the thing they claimed they could do. And in that moment, the quiet hands that did the work all along are the only hands that can save you. So do your work. Sign it where it counts, even in secret. The flower in the iron always finds the light in the end.